Okay.
All right, today is Thursday, May 18th, 2023, and this is an interview with Roy Miles in the J.L. Rodman building. My name is Kirsten Messinger. I'll be the interview, and Jan Perano is the camera operator. All right, so first off, what is your connection to Waxhaw?
My great-grandfather was one of the founders of Waxhaw, J.L. Rodman. He came here somewhere around 1890, and he built a home here. His family was into cotton. Eventually, he built the mill here. It was Heath and Rodman Mill. He had the bank right across the street, and 2 store buildings here and here, and 3,000 acres of land. And we have one of the original deeds, 1897. He bought 600 acres in Lancaster County for $2 an acre.
Oh, wow.
Those days are gone. But he was a blessing. I live on that farm. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's real beautiful. All trees now, cotton's gone.
Oh, okay, so I know, so the Rodman, but then who were you named after?
One of his daughters, he had 5 daughters and 1 son. And Allie Rodman married my grandfather, Roy Walkup. And I was named after him. I'm Roy Walkup Miles.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
okay.
And Roy Walkup was the mayor here in the 1960s.
All right, we'll come back to him. We're gonna stick with the
Okay.
Rodman family a little longer. Okay, so do you know what originally brought them to the Waxhaw area? And if you don't, that's
Yeah,
fine.
this is an interesting history. I learned something a few weeks ago. There is a man, we see him up on the bridge all the time. He's a retired Presbyterian minister. And he has a site called Waxhaw Railroading. And we were talking to him, my brother Paul was with me, and he asked me about my history, and I told him J.L. Rodman was one of the founders here, and he said, do you know who his father was? And I said, I know he died in the Civil War, but I don't know much more. Well, 2 weeks later, he brought me he'd gone to Ancestry.com, traced my family all the way back to the 1700s. They were from Northern Ireland, and I went to seminary with a friend of mine. He's from Ireland, and I've known him for 50 years. I called him, I said, Ken, I'm Irish. And he said, do you know what town they were from? And I looked at that thing, it's Antrim. And he said, that's 7 miles where I'm from.
Oh, no
And I said,
kidding.
well, you're just a little slow. We got here 200 years before you. And he said, Antrim was known for its textiles. So I started doing some research. Yes, there was linen made from flax and cotton in that area. And those people came here, the Scotch-Irish. I'm from Lancaster County, right south of here. And at one time, the world's largest cotton mill was in Lancaster, the Springs Mill. And this area was just known for its cotton. And I found out to do cotton, you have to be near water. And of course, we're right here at the Catawba River. And that's where my family brought their knowledge of cotton here. And then my great-grandfather took that knowledge and built the mill here. And he bought a lot of land, had it in cotton. So I didn't even know that myself.
How interesting.
And it went back 8 generations.
Oh, wow.
And if you count my 3 sons and 1 grandson, 10 generations now have been influenced by that, or I should say blessed
Yeah.
by the work in cotton. And when he came to Waxhaw, it was, to the best of my knowledge, around 1890, maybe a little earlier. He had lost a leg in a sawmill accident, went to Northern Virginia. I thought it was Alexandria, or my brother Paul thinks it's Baltimore. But during the Civil War, a lot of the soldiers lost limbs, and he went up there to get a prosthesis. And while there, he took a business course. I don't even know if he had a high school education.
Oh, wow.
But when he came back here, he built the mill, the bank. There were 2 stores, the one we're in now, and the one across the street, and he had 3,000 acres of land.
Wow.
And the worst time, it was after the Civil War during Reconstruction. And I always tell people, if he can do it, you can do it. You know, this is the land of opportunity. We are so blessed to go to work.
Yep.
And I share with people all the time, his motto was truth, honesty, and effort. And I'm going to put that on this building one day, the J.L. Rodman building, truth, honesty, effort. And I tell people his view, he was a Christian, and there's a verse in the Bible, a righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. In my case, children's children. I'm still blessed because of Christian values, strong Christian values. Waxhaw at one time had strong Christian values. It's one of my concerns about Waxhaw. I see that changing.
Yeah.
So he saw truth as vertically between you and God. And then he saw honesty as how you treat other people. And my family has been known for treating other people kindly. The Methodist Church here on the Cornerstone has his name on it. So he invested in the kingdom of God. That's honesty, how you treat people. And then effort is what you do. So you have God, others, and self. To me, it's a good motto.
Yeah.
Truth, honesty, and effort.
Yeah. So two things. You were talking earlier about the story about him doing the shopping in Monroe. Can you tell that again?
That was my grandfather, Roy Walker.
Oh, okay. Wait, hold on. Let's wait then. We're gonna continue with the Robin for a
Well,
little
he
bit.
married Ellie Rodman.
Okay. We'll get to the walk-ups in a moment. Okay, so you mentioned the church, what is now the Methodist Church. Did he attend that church, or was he just supporting?
There were Roy Walker, my grandfather was Presbyterian,
Okay.
and the Rodmans, I believe, were Methodist, and I'm going to have to ask my brother Paul about that. But one of the jokes they had when they voted, Roy Walker would vote Republican, and Allie would vote Democrat, and they canceled each other's vote. That was the history. It's Presbyterian, Methodist, and Republican, Democrat. We're a little bit of both.
Covering everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you said he built this building. What was this building when he?
There was a family. This is Broome Street, right here where it is, and the house where he lives 1 block over was Providence, and Providence was Main Street all the way down until they made this street. The old wooden trestle bridge right here. I never saw it.
That makes sense then. Okay.
Yeah, I never saw it, but my grandmother told me it was lower and wider, and horses and buggies would drive right over it. That was Providence Street, the bridge, and because of it was just a bad angle for a road to go up and over all the time, and they brought it over here. And this was Broome Street, and my understanding, this building was built by a family named Broome.
Okay.
And I don't know if they owned it for a while, and then my grandfather bought it, or it's a little bit older than the history I know. My great-grandfather died in 1918, so he owned the store prior to that, and the best of my knowledge is somewhere around 1904.
Okay.
And I've heard all kinds of stories. It's been a church, an antique store, I mean, just a little bit of everything over the
Okay.
years.
All right. So then, now we'll switch up to your grandfather. Tell us a little about him.
His name was Roy Walker. He was a farmer. About 5 miles south of here is Tirzah Church, where he went, Tirzah Church Road. They lived on Walkup Avenue. That's down near the Jar Center, if you're familiar with this area. And the very first, it might have been the second Belk store was right across the street.
Yes.
And Granddad worked there, Roy Walker worked there, and that's, we believe, where he met my grandmother, who lived right over here. And Allie Rodman and Roy Walker. They got married, and then they settled here. When my great-grandfather died, Allie and Roy Walker moved into the house, and Roy Walker became the mayor here in the 1960s. I can tell you a story about the old fire department here.
Yes.
This was before they had cell phones and pagers. They had this huge buzzer on top of the building. And when there was a fire, it was all volunteer. That thing would go off, boy, you would jump out of your seat. That thing was so loud, but then the firemen would all come in. But Roy Walker, as a farmer, he shared this story with me. When they needed, once a month, when they needed something, they grew all their own food. But there were a few items they couldn't grow and things they had to buy, like clothing and so on. They would go to Monroe. And I live right near there right now. I can get to Monroe in a little over 20 minutes. But they had to take a buckboard, horse and buggy days, and he told me they would get the buckboard loaded. This was a big thing. They were excited about it. And one day they would, if you could think of the speed of horse, they would go to Monroe, camp out. Next day they would shop, get all their supplies, camp out that night. And then the third day they would come back, so it would take them 3 days, once a month, to get all their supplies. But I can remember Granddad, their home over here, had a garden. It was one of the best gardens I've ever seen. I learned to eat vegetables, fresh vegetables. They're different than the frozen ones we bought. And when he had his garden, I can tell you some funny stories about that. Across the street, there was a man named,
Excuse me. Just
a man named Robert Harris. And he and Granddad would always compete with who could grow the biggest tomato.
Oh. I got one too. Hold on.
You got it. You want to take a break for a minute? Need some water?
power through. Okay.
Okay.
Tomato competition.
All right. Granddad would have a garden, and he had these big boy tomatoes. And those things are so big, you could slice them, and one slice would cover a loaf of bread.
Oh, wow.
And he would put some mayonnaise on there and lettuce. So one day, Robert Harris came over, and he had the biggest big boy tomato. So, and then later he confessed he came over that night and cut it off Granddad's. But and then Grandma did canning, and when we were boys, we would play in that old house, and everything was wood. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. There was a hole above the stove, a little teeny hole in the wood ceiling. We climbed up there and we found this thing. It was about that long, and we thought it was a bullet. It was the top of the canner. They had a little pressure. It blew the pressure valve off.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we found it up there. Then there was, they would store that food in a cellar under the house and have food all winter long. But there are many Americans now wanting to go back to homesteading. The 5-acre farm was a big thing. The farm where I lived had 8 homes on it, and each home had a 5-acre field behind it. And I go out there with my metal detector. I have found all kind of mule shoes, horseshoes. I thought it was a horseshoe, and it was shaped like this. And horseshoes are like this.
Yeah.
And I asked a friend of mine who has horses, and I said, "What is this?" And she said, "That's a mule shoe." I didn't know the difference, but I find them out there everywhere. And it's hard to believe that back then, that is about all one man could do, 5 acres. And my great-grandfather, he helped with the homes, the land, the grain, and then they would share the proceeds. So it was a lot of work. The 5-acre farm disappeared because with the big tractors, they want more land and flatter land, but it's coming back now. People that do homesteading want to grow their own foods. People are wanting to put solar panels in for their own electricity, and it's just the times are changing.
Yeah, everything's a cycle.
Yes.
Cycles back. Do you have any recollections or memories or stories passed down of when your grandfather was mayor? Is he known for something as mayor?
Waxhaw has some things that are much better and some things I think are worse. There was a lot of prejudice here in the 60s. My granddad loved all people the same. Everybody's heard the story of the man in Washington who said, "I have a dream." And one day we would judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I can remember, we lived there. I remember when that speech was given live. Granddad treated all people the same. It didn't matter. And I can remember when I was a little boy one day, my dad was a minister in Northern Virginia, and we would come down here during the summer and spend a month in Waxhaw. And one day this man came up, and he was a colored man. That's how they called it back then. And he had a horse. Man, I got a boy. Every TV show was cowboys.
Yes.
In Washington, D.C., we didn't have horses. Man, here's a horse. And his name was Bill Davis. and the horse name was Dan. I could actually remember that. I was probably about maybe 10 at the most. But Granddad loved all people, and all people loved him. And one of my favorite stories, the Waxhaw Cemetery is right out here, and he's buried out there. He died in 1968. I came to the funeral. I was in college at that time. That cemetery was packed. You could not put another person in there. They all came to see him. They loved him as made all people from Waxhaw.
I like that story.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go through my notes real quick. Okay. So I know you lived in or grew up in Northern Virginia, but
Yes.
you would summer here in Waxhaw.
Mhm.
What were some of the biggest differences or culture shocks between the two locations?
I love the vegetables down here. I love the southern cooking, seriously.
Yeah.
Um, we love the trains going by. Every time we'd hear that whistle, we'd go running. And we'd get up on the bridge to watch the train. And this is back in the 50s. One day I ran up there and something was wrong. The trains just didn't look the same. And I came back and said, Granddad, what's wrong with the trains? I said, they look different and they stink. He laughed. He said, those are the new diesels. Mine are they were the old steam engines.
Oh wow.
And to me, there's nothing like an old steam engine. We go up to Bryson City. They have a steam engine up there that they run just for tourists. But when they switched to diesels, they never went back. We did see all kinds of different trains go by here. They had passenger trains with the big Pullman cars.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And the depot used to be right here.
Oh, that's right.
I wish they hadn't taken that down. That was a real sight. Black Mountain is a city near Asheville. They kept their depot. It looked just like the one here. And but people would travel by train. It was before the day of personal cars.
Sure.
And this building and the one across the street were hotels. There were almost always hotels near the depot. And we would see those big Pullman cars. I rode the Pullman train one time from Alexandria, Virginia down to Monroe. My grandparents picked me up. Those are the nicest cars. But I can remember sleeping in it. It was during the night, and you would hear click, 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 click. You know, all night long in those cars. In the seats, you could just lean them back and sleep. And, my grandparents picked me up. You don't see, it's almost all freight now. And my brother Paul told me he saw the Barnum and Bailey Circus go by. He did it years ago. Uncle Jake, that was my great-grandfather's son, he would always tease us. He said, see if you can find a yellow caboose. They were all red. And boy, when a train go by, we'd run up there looking for that yellow caboose. I never did see one. I think he was teasing us. But I do remember the conductor. You could look in as the train was going by, and he'd be sitting back there reading the newspaper. And he had a little kerosene heater.
Oh.
If it was cold, that was more or less his home when the train was on the road.
Yeah.
And those days were gone.
Yeah, that's true too. Well, so obviously your family's from here, but what made you decide to then move down here yourself?
I'm in the ministry. I never thought I would live in Lancaster, which is right south of here. But when I got through seminary, I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, went on a missionary study tour. That was it for me. I didn't want any more education. I did kindergarten, 12 years of regular school, 4 years of college, and 3 years of seminary. I was ready to go to work. And I prayed over there, and I felt the Lord saying, there'll be 2 or more churches waiting for you when you get back. And that was strange. I called my parents when I got back, Asbury Seminary in Kentucky. And Dad said, Roy, there are 2 churches in Lancaster looking for a pastor. He was in Chester, nearby. And so I looked into it, and I went on the field there in Lancaster. And I've been there ever since 1975.
Oh wow, okay.
But Waxhaw is just 12 miles from where I live to here. And I kind of view both of the Carolinas as home. very similar to Andrew Jackson. Some say he was born in South Carolina, some say he was born in North Carolina. And he said, when they asked him, where were you born, he said, in the Carolinas. So I love both South Carolina and North Carolina, beautiful states. We have the beach, we have the mountains, I mean, it's beautiful. The weather's just right.
Oh, wow.
And once I got here, I stayed here. Once I have every family seems to have one person that's interested in like the historian, the one who knows the family and all that. I'm that person.
Okay.
And I feel a connection to family. My ancestors, they blessed me. I want to be a blessing to my children and children's children. Which is like home, that's all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, so what have been some of the biggest changes? Because I know Waxhaw has really changed in just the past 10 years, 20 years, so what have, I mean, you've been talking about it throughout our interview, but what are some of the biggest changes you can recall seeing in Waxhaw?
I can see what I consider good things, and I see what I consider bad things. The bad thing would have been when I was here in the 50s and the 60s, there was prejudice. And I can remember right up in front of the store building here a KKK rally. And I was young, might have been high school, college age. And there was a big crowd gathered out here. And the man was recruiting. He was standing up here in front of my store, giving a speech about the KKK. You know. And there was an American Indian, and he was right out there on the edge of the thing. And every time the KKK man would say something, the Indian would go boom, boom, boom. He had a drum, and he would make a comment. I thought, this guy is brave, you know. And at the end, the KKK man said, well, thank you for letting me come. And I heard boom, boom, boom. Thank you for coming, and thank you for going. Yeah. I'll never forget that. That was the best one line. So, the Old South had its prejudices, and we're doing much better in that area now. The schools, everything. The one thing, though, I can remember, there was a church on every corner in Waxhaw, and these were spiritual people. Whatever side of the camp you were on, they were godly people, good people. And there now seems to be a bar on every corner in Waxhaw. It was a big battle. I've talked to some of the people that were on the town hall, the commission. One lady told me they brought up, this was a dry town, and they brought up alcohol 3 times and it was voted down, no. And on the 4th time it was voted yes. And it now seems the mentality has changed here. Instead of Christians and a church on every corner, it seems to me to be kind of like a college fraternity dorm or whatever, that boys' mentality. I have a little tract of land right behind the store here. They have trashed it. There are 2 bars right connected to my land. I have found bottles everywhere. I found bottles on the roof. We have found glass pipes in my brother's yard. He lives right across the street from the brewery here. And I asked one of my sons, what is a glass pipe? And he said, Dad, that's what they smoke crack and meth with. We have found other things, which I won't mention. The mentality has just changed here. And that is a concern to me.
Well, some of the questions that I ask all of our interviewers deals with kind of the, I can't think of the word, not the landscape. Certain markers that are Waxhaw known for. So would you have any story that revolves around the water tank?
My brother Paul could answer this better than I. He is 7 years younger than I am, and he knew things that I didn't know because I had gone off to college. My grandfather, when he was mayor, Paul told this, I don't know if this is right or not, but the water level had to be checked, and Granddad would come up and check it, and they had to manually, if it was getting too full, stop it.
Oh, wow.
and then turn it back on when it needed to flow.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
My understanding is it's not being used at all now. I don't.
No.
Mhm. So, but it is kind of one of the signature wax on that in the old bridge over here.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know how they check the water level? Did they have to climb up every time, or did they check
My
it from the
understanding
ground?
was there was like a float thing that would rise,
Oh,
and when it got to
okay,
a certain point,
okay.
you had to turn it off. And,
All right.
yeah, I don't know if that's right or not.
That's much safer.
Someone could hear this and take it and fact check me, you know, and let me know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
We love the train. Like I said, I can remember the depot,
Mhm.
and I wish they had kept that.
Yeah.
My understanding is that was cut in half, and there are two houses out here right now that were made from the depot. The old bridge, we talked about the old bridge a little bit, how Grandmom told me it used to be lower. It was Providence, it was the main road that goes into Charlotte,
Yeah.
and the horse and buggies could go over it. My great-grandfather had the mill, I can remember that. This was before my time, but I was told a lot of them, what we would call mill houses, were heated by the mill. There's a giant smokestack there now.
Yeah.
And the boiler the water would go across where the tracks are. The old homes were over here, some were over here. And they would heat homes via the mill. Mills have pros and cons. The old smokestack probably burned coal and would dump a lot of ashes on that side of town. So, those are the three things I can probably.
And those are the three landmarks. Yep. I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mill is now condominiums.
Yeah.
And I'm glad someone took that and restored it.
Yes.
And from what I've heard, I've not been in it since they restored it, but I've heard that they're really nice homes.
Well, have you heard any family legends about the mill? For example, I mean, you mentioned where the mill houses were. Maybe what they looked like. What were they producing in the mill?
All the mill houses are just your basic box. They're real
Yeah.
small homes. But this gave people a job. It got them off the farm. That was really hard work back then, farming. Plowing everything with mules and then harvesting. And you could have a bad year if the weather went bad. And to get a regular job with a regular salary and have a home that was heated, that was a big advance at the time. Today's families wouldn't want to live there probably and work at a mill. Almost all the mills in the South have closed now.
Yeah.
They're in China.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an advance for the day, but that was 100 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Time marches on.
Mhm.
You mentioned the building across the way that's the one that's no longer standing, right?
Correct. Mhm.
What used to be there?
It was the Rodman building. It was two buildings side by side, and the one closest to the road here was 2 stories. The one next to it, and they were open from the inside, but the one next to it, there was a large oval opening. I mean, a large one, and you could, when you came in the first floor, you could look up and see the second floor. And the second floor, you could walk around, and my great-grandfather died in 1918, and it was like a time capsule. They closed it for a while, and then his son, we called him Uncle Jake, ran it for a while. But there were things in there from prior to 1918.
Wow.
The women's shoes were like boots that came up, and they were tied all the way up.
Yeah.
And there were these little hooks you would pull to get those
Right.
things tight. We saw those. All kinds of appliances for horses, buggies, harnesses, things like that. And then, this is the story I was told, Tweetsy's Railroad, which is in Boiling Rock near Boone, had a little store you could shop in and see what life was like 100 years ago. They came down and bought all those old antique things. They're up there now, and I'm glad they got them because the building burned down and they would have been lost.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. What was there a purpose behind the oval in the floor? Was it just a decorative feature so you could see? Okay.
Yeah. But we as kids would love to go up on that second floor and we
Oh,
could look down.
absolutely, yeah.
This is an unusual building. And there was this building right here was partially destroyed by a fire. And it used to be 2 stories all the way back, and this room right here now is what they kept upstairs.
Oh.
It used to be brick all the way to the front, And they brought it in, they parted this porch and put these glass walls here.
Yeah.
I had a man come up to me and he presented a historical review he had done on this building. It was one of the first, what they call a glass wall in America.
Oh, wow.
And now you see them everywhere. There are buildings made out of all glass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was big in the 70s.
But you can look around, the other buildings are all brick in the front.
Mm-hmm.
And they replaced the brick with glass.
Oh, wow.
And primitive for its day, but I mean by our day, but for
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
then
yeah,
it was
that
an
was-
advance.
Absolutely.
And this, they call that rolled glass or pattern glass.
Mm-hmm.
We had a truck. Someone told me it was a big garbage truck, and there were high pressured tires to support the weight of the truck. And the truck hit the corner up here on the street. The man I know across the railroad tracks here said it sounded like a cannon going off. It broke two of these windows. It just boom, it shattered. And I went to a glass place in Monroe, and they said you can't even buy that glass nowadays.
Oh, wow.
So we had to replace it with clear safety glass.
Oh,
The windows that broke.
oh wow.
But that's just 100-year-old technology. Right
Yeah,
there.
you know, yeah.
Mhm.
That people don't keep up with. Well, the house that your brother lives in, could you describe the inside? You know, what were the rooms, architectural
There are
features?
9 rooms
Oh,
in
that's a
that
big
house, big rooms. There are tall ceilings. All the ceilings, you can look up where the light is, and you'll see 3 holes in the wood ceiling. It used to be, 1890 was prior to electricity when that was built. And they told me there were acetylene tanks outside, and they would run the gas in and light
Oh,
with
wow.
acetylene. Each room had a fireplace. There were 9 fireplaces. There are 3 chimneys. You know how some of them are back to back and 2-story. And the house was heated at first with wood, then with coal, and then kerosene. And I can remember those old kerosene heaters. During the winter, it'd be 90 degrees up there and 20 degrees down here. It was not a good place. But that's what they had.
Mm-hmm.
And my great-grandfather had 6 children, 5 girls, including my grandmother, and Uncle Jake, poor boy, he had 5 sisters.
Oh,
And there was a room for each
wow.
child, you know.
Wow.
Growing up, my grandmother loved to paint. In one room, the wood walls were painted. Paul said, that's got to be Grandma's room. Now, I would love to see that house restored, but it's getting in bad condition now.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful home.
Yeah.
And the barn was out back. I can remember, I don't remember the cow, but I can remember the stalls. My mom remembers when they all had their animals there. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
this was before cars when that house was built. The wiring is horrible too. It all needs to be rewired.
Oh, well.
There were no appliances back then. And I do remember this. There was a wire hanging down. It's like 10-foot, 13, 12-foot ceilings. I mean, they're real tall. And they did that during the summer. The heat would rise and it would make it more comfortable down below. But when they did put lighting in, they would just hang one wire. And I can remember it was forked. One went to the light bulb and one went to the plug. That was it.
Oh.
And when Granddad wanted to use a toaster, he had to plug it in. Yeah, it just, when that house was built, the kitchen had the old wood stoves, and yeah, so it needs to totally be modernized. It's a beautiful home.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can go in the back part of the house, and there are 2 smaller rooms, 1 story. That was the original house where they lived while they were building the front part.
Oh.
So,
Oh, that's neat.
mhm.
Now, do you know how they designed the house? Did they have an architect? Did they just draw it on paper? Did they pick it out of a book?
Yeah, I don't know that they had an architect. It is a big, basic box. And when you come in the front, there's a hall that's about 10 feet wide, goes all the way back. And the living room and the master bedroom's on one side, the dining room and the kitchen's on the other side.
Okay.
And then there are 3 bedrooms upstairs on the big box. And then they kept the 2 original 1-story thing as
Okay.
bedrooms also.
I'd love to see that house.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Well, when you came down to visit for the summer, where would you stay?
We stayed upstairs. The boys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were upstairs, they had one of the original feather beds
Oh.
upstairs. And when I say feather, I mean
Real feathers?
feathers. And that thing would be about this tall. And when you get in it, you would settle down, it would fluff around you. I think those are still there.
Wow.
I'd have to ask my brother Paul, but we had the upstairs, put the boys upstairs.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh, earlier, when we had talked on the phone, you had mentioned a story about your grandmother explaining the laundromat
Mhm.
and the sign that you saw at the laundromat. Do you want to tell that story?
All right, now, I grew up in Northern Virginia. I did not think the way of the Old South. And I was about 10 years old. And like I said, whenever we'd hear the train whistle, we'd run and get up on the old trestle bridge. And there's a little building right across the street, used to be the laundromat. And I'm just standing up there after the train went by, I'm looking. And on the front it said, white only, on the laundromat. You know, what does that mean? And I came back down the stairs on the trestle bridge and saw Grandma. I said, Grandma, what does that mean, white only? Did they only let you wash white clothes in that? And she laughed at me, that's the way it was back then.
Yeah.
And like I said, some things are better. Waxhaw, that's one of the things we've done better here.
Yeah.
And some things are worse.
I like that story and perceiving the world through a child's eyes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
All right. I'm trying to think. So you mentioned the other buildings that your grandfather owned. What were those buildings used for?
There was one building across the street. It has the colonial windows.
Yes.
That was the bank.
Okay.
And he had the bank along with the mill. And he died in 1918. And I know the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913 when Woodrow Wilson was president. And they made the dollar that we have now the currency for all of the United States. And I asked myself one time, well, I wonder what currency my grandfather used. And I went online, and one of the popular currencies in North Carolina came out of Raleigh. And I wouldn't be surprised if he used that. The one good thing about that, you could take your note and it was redeemable with gold.
Oh.
You can't use our dollar that way now. It's worth about 4 cents. I wish we had kept some of the currency from back then. We do. There was an unusual habit my family had. When someone died, they would keep their personal effects. Sometimes they would be in a box. And so Ann Brown, when she died, there was a little metal box about this round, this tall, and it had some old coins in it. And she had been riding on one of the trains, and when the train would start, it would bang as it pulled, and it knocked her over. She was standing, and I don't know if it broke her hip or hurt her hip, but that little metal box was right there. So they kept it as momentum with the coins in it. And it's probably still over there. I don't know what Paul has done with all that stuff.
Wow.
I have an uncle, Roy, he died of scarlet fever. He was 13 years old. And they kept his wallet. And I want to say he died in the 1930s, and it had some of the older $1 bills
Oh yeah.
in it.
Wow.
We have some of the old deeds,
Yeah.
and how, when my great-grandfather died, it was divided among his wife and the 6 children. So I guess that's one of the reasons I'm interested in history, and I'm still learning things.
Well, oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Is that how you ended up with this building? Because this was passed down through your line?
We met one day. I had 3 brothers, and older brother Bobby just wanted land. And that farm I live on now had 604 acres.
Oh wow.
He got almost half of it, but no buildings.
Yeah.
And my brother Paul got the house, and I asked for the store building, and there was a store building in Chester. that Aunt Brown had. I got that one. And my brother David, there was a home in Montreat, North Carolina, the Presbyterian Conference Ground. He loved that home, so we let him have that home. Everybody got something.
Oh, wow. So then did your cousins then own the other Rodman buildings?
This one over here,
Yeah.
Uncle Jake, the one boy of the.
Oh, that's right.
He
that's
got
right.
that
Mhm.
building.
Okay.
And then I have never met his daughter, Myra,
Oh.
was my mom's age. And my understanding is they moved to New York, and I have
Oh.
cousins in New York I've never met.
Okay.
And she
okay.
sold it after Uncle Jake died.
Yeah.
And the mill, J.L. Rodman's wife and oldest daughter, Pearl Rodman, they called her sister. She was the oldest. Ran the mill for a while, and they sold it. And a lot of the land has been sold off.
Okay.
Almost all the land.
Mm.
I have one of the few remaining tracts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm selling some of it myself. So.
But it also sounds like this line has actually stayed in the area where everyone else is kind of
Mhm.
scattered.
Well, I, for some reason, love Waxhaw. So he got the house, I got the store. I have 3 sons, and I asked each of them, I'm working on my will, what do you want? And my older son, Caleb, he said the house, not on the farm. I asked my son, Seth, what do you want? He said, I want the store. And really, that gives him, he has actually lived here for a while in the apartment. And then downstairs he has 2 renters, so he has a place to live and an income.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that would work out fine for him. And my youngest son, Nathan, who now lives in Philadelphia, I said, what do you want? He said, whatever. You know, I don't think I'm going to have any trouble dividing it. They don't fight each other. They just,
That's good.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
and I told them if I ever catch you fighting the moment after I die, I said, I'm going to come back and fight.
Yep, exactly.
We have been blessed. And my spiritual heritage is very important to me. My father's now deceased, a Presbyterian minister. I grew up in the church. My grandparents were Christians. I'll tell you a story about Grandmom over here. I play solitary all the time. I played solitary this morning. And when I would come down here, we would play with poker cards. That was a no-no, you know. I don't even know if they still make these. They were called rook cards. And they were, the poker cards have 13 persons. The rook had 14, and the rook goes by different colors, and we'd have to play solitary with rook cards.
Ah.
We went to the little Presbyterian church up here, which is now out there, and you didn't question whether or not you were going to go to church. You went to church.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one Sunday, now this was when we lived in Northern Virginia, I decided I wasn't going to go to church. And I got the Sunday paper. Back then they had the funnies, the cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sitting in Dad's chair reading the cartoons, and I told Mom I wasn't going to go. Yeah, I never even thought that way after that. But that's my heritage, you know, spiritual heritage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I see things through that lens. Like when you ask me what's going on here in Waxhaw, how do I see it now? And
Yeah.
I see it through a spiritual view.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, there was a shift. So your family, were farmers, and then your grandfather was a mayor, and then
Mhm.
your father was a minister. Was there a conscious effort in your family to shift away from farming? I mean, I realize that was what was happening with the times too, but
Like I said, my great grandfather was a merchant, and you study the history of, like in 1849, the gold rush.
Mm-hmm.
The merchants were the ones that made the money, because they supplied all the people thinking they were going to get gold, and that's how my great grandfather made his business. He was a merchant,
okay.
and he set Aunt Brown up in Chester, my grandmom, and Lancaster, another sister in Weddington. Everyone he was set up in business. That's just the way he did things. So part of my heritage was business oriented. Then the ministry was another part of my heritage, and then the farming. So right now I live out on the farm. I'm writing Christian literature, and I have a garden. And I'm going to put that into a program. I've done my research. There are 400,000 churches approximately in America, and I've traveled around the world. this program could be used in any church in the world. And so I want to use the business part of my inheritance
There you go.
with that plus the spiritual part. And I love my home out in the country. I want to get a solar array, so I'll be totally net zero. And I want to be able to produce my own food. Those are just goals. So I get a little bit from every
Yeah.
ancestor.
Combine it all together. Do you have any other family stories that have been passed down?
This is a good one about, okay, Roy Walker. If you go here, talking about my upbringing, if you go from here, you'll come to Tirzah Church Road, and there's a Tirzah Presbyterian Church. Go out behind the church, there is the cemetery. And when you walk down, you'll see Daniel Walkup was my great-grandfather on the Walkup side. And then Pinckney Walkup, I counted, it goes back about 3 or 4 generations of Walkups.
Wow.
Lived there. Walkup Road was right there. And when you get around behind the cemetery, there's a little building they call the meeting house, and it's where the elders of the church would meet. And one day, Granddad was about 5 or 6 years old, and he was cutting up in church. His mother looked at him, took him to the meeting house, ministered the Board of Education, and brought him back in. He was sitting there in church. He went to church till the day he died. And we hear stories today about you shouldn't discipline your children, and that's corporal punishment or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't hurt him. Raise them up in the way they should go, A lot of little stories like that about our family. And I can remember Reverend Morton from that would be the 1960s. Was the pastor here at the Presbyterian Church. We'd go every Sunday. Like I said, it wasn't an option.
Yeah.
But I've been blessed by that. I consider it a blessing. Some people would consider it a curse, but not me. Just a little bit of the history of America. I kept hearing about a man named Adam Smith. So who was Adam Smith? Well, I went online, and basically he wrote 2 books that influenced our country. One was called The Wealth of Nations, and in that he showed how capitalism, you let every person, they're free to start their own business, just like my great-grandfather did. And he said, you get the government off, and he said, you will see an invisible hand go across your country, and it will prosper. And that is and that's why we've prospered. That's why people from all over the world are coming here. The second book he wrote, the first one was The Wealth of Nations, Capitalism. The second one was on morals and ethics. He said, unless you have a core value system, the first one won't work. People get greedy, they'll cheat each other, kill each other over things. And for American, I think people have lost this. Our core values were based on Protestant Christianity, basically. And you're going to see as we get away from our core values, the other part will fall too. And just watch, okay? So you need both of those, and that's what I was brought up with. Morals and ethics, and freedom to build whatever God wants you to build. And I like the way in our country we have 12 years of free education. I know we have to pay taxes, but for the student it's free.
Yes.
And when you turn 18, you're old enough to take what you've been given and make the best of it. And what gets me is these kids that they see school as just party time, and they're not really using what they're being blessed with. They don't have the morals and the ethics, and therefore they're not building the corporations the way they should be built, structured-wise. And I could go on and on with stories about that, but that's, this is the land of opportunity. And take what you've been given and make the best of it.
So do you remember any national events and how they directly impacted Waxhaw? Maybe the JFK's assassination or Martin King's assassination, what the times were like then, and how did Waxhaw react to those things?
I can tell you how they influenced me. And I'll tell you the two greatest speeches I can remember. And like I said, we grew up 5 miles from Washington, D.C. I would drive into Washington all the time. I love the Smithsonian, and, and the mall,
Yep.
the art museum, and the archives. But JFK's speech, everyone remembers this. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That influenced me. And I can say this country has blessed me. But I want to give back. And the second speech was Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. And when he said, and I had mentioned this earlier, I have a dream that one day we will not judge people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I think Martin Luther King's statue is being torn down now. In a way, I'm not talking about physically, but by people who are now judging by the color again. Which to me is unfortunate. Again, it's a land of opportunity. It doesn't matter what color you are. Just go out there and build your dream. So those two speeches influenced me, and here I am in Waxhaw, a store owner, and my brother Paul, and that indirectly has influenced Waxhaw. And I know there are other people that were influenced by those speeches. I can tell you something about that Martin Luther King era. I grew up in the 60s, high school age. I had friends that were drafted right out of high school. One day you're in high school, next day you're in Vietnam. And I'm one of the ones that would have protested that. I didn't believe we needed to be over there at all. And Martin Luther King had a lot of death threats. Well, my parents, the home they had up in the mountains at Montreat, Martin Luther King was going to speak at the Anderson Auditorium in Montreat, and it's the big Presbyterian conference ground. I'm sure it holds over 1,000 people. And I told Mom, I must have been about 9th grade, I said, I want to go down and hear him speak. And she didn't want me to go because of the bomb threats. And she said, well, if your father will go with you, I'll let you go. And I thought, well, if I die, he's going to die too. Or if we just lose one of us. But we went down and I heard him speak there. And he was speaking on the black community, and one of the problems was the matriarch. And I was taking Latin, and I knew mater meant mother, arche rules. And you know, that is still one of the problems today. And the black home is the absentee father. And white homes too. I'm not just, but fathers need to step up and do their part and take care of those children they have. And again, your old-fashioned values. If you have a child, you take care of that child. But yeah, that era influenced me. And those two men, JFK and Martin Luther King, influenced me. We had the first interracial church in Lancaster County. And I'm ashamed to say, when I came there in 1975, whites, blacks in the church. The most segregated hour was 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. And when we started in 1977, Church of Lancaster, it was open to anybody who wanted to come. And when I can remember, we had some black families come. One of the white families came and talked to me and said, Roy, you need to hear what's going on in the town. They were saying, what happened to Roy? He came from such a good family.
Wow.
But we all got along. And that, mark my words, that'll be the future of the church. It won't be blacks, white, it'll be a coming together. And I see a great awakening getting ready to happen in America. I went to Asbury Seminary across the street from Asbury a few months ago. They had an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. People were coming from all over, they call it the Asbury Revival, but people were coming from all over the world to see that. They said the traffic, it was a little town like Mineral Springs, Wilmore, Kentucky, where Asbury is. There was a 2.5 mile backup of traffic to get into town. There were so many people coming to the revival, they had to open up 6 other rooms and it would be televised and show. Then they finally, the college president said this was one of the hardest things he had to do. He had to tell the students they had to go back to class because they were all in chapel, we know just worshiping God as a genuine outpouring of the Holy Spirit. It will affect them for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
An outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And that's what I see happening in America now. And you do have one group going one way, but I see the other group going, to me, a better way, the church.
Well, when you were integrating the church, did you receive any threats for what you were doing?
No,
Okay.
just comments. No, I will say this, the black people were nicer to me than the white people. I don't know. The new church, we come together, we don't see white or black. It's just like, you got blonde hair, you've got red hair. We don't think that way. And the new church, you got black skin. I had friends who were close to the Catawba Indian and Cherokee Indian. I had black friends who were part Cherokee and white friends who were part Cherokee. And, it's just, we're people. We're just, and we got away from that division.
So other than the KKK rally that happened here, do you remember anything else about KKK in Waxhaw?
Let me tell you what happened. In that church I pastored, there was a young man that grew up in the church. And he went to the University of South Carolina in Columbia and met a girl. She came from a wealthy family. I don't know if you remember these things they call crazy straws.
Oh, yeah.
Her father invented those.
Oh, no kidding.
And he told me some interesting stories about what's going on in the businesses in America. He had to move his business to Mexico because the taxes were so high here. And that's not a good thing. You keep hearing, raise the taxes on the wealthy. Well, they'll just move.
Yep.
And there goes your businesses. Again, that invisible hand, if you get too many restrictions on it, you'll stop it. And they were from Michigan. And they had me, I flew up there to do the wedding. They asked me if I would do his wedding. Like I said, I knew the boy from the time he was little growing up. And they told me, watch out for Grandpa. He was just real mean and grumpy. And when he heard I was from the South, he said, are you KKK? They just think everybody down here is still KKK. I said, no. Fortunately, that's in our past, and it needs to be boom, boom, boom. Thank you for going. I'm glad that's over with. That was a bad time for our country. I lived in towns where the mayor was KKK, the sheriff was KKK. To be in politics, you almost had to in some areas. Wow. And I had a roommate in college. He said they actually had a sign where it welcomed you to the city, where I won't mention the name. But it said, don't let the sun set on you, and then it used a bad word, I remember the old South. It was not, like I said, there's some things better, we're doing better. The schools are better. When I came, I had a friend of mine, he was our song leader. At that time, when he was growing up, he had to go to the black school. He was black. And little town he lived in near us, there was a pharmacy, and black people weren't even allowed in the store. He would ride his bike to the store, they would give him the prescription, and he would take it to the black people. So again, things were better now. I can remember, I don't remember segregation in restaurants. I can remember smoking in restaurants. But when I go to a restaurant now, I don't look and, hey, they're Hispanic people, they're black people, they're white people. They're just people, and that's the way we should think. Sure. I have a dream, that I was influenced by that speech.
Do you have any last questions?
No, no.
Do you have any last stories?
I have
Anything
enjoyed.
that I
I've
haven't?
got plenty of stories. When you get my age, you have a lot of stories to tell.
Sure.
And, I have enjoyed this. Thank you for.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. Well, this concludes our Thursday, May 18th, 2023 interview with Roy Miles.